Well, welcome to Blackfish Gallery in Portland, Oregon. My name is Angela Passalacqua, and this is my show of paintings and drawings. This is May of 2015, and the title of the show is Transparencies, Revealing What is Hidden. I chose this title because it really relates to all the work in the show in somewhat different ways, sometimes on a psychological level and sometimes in a very literal level. This painting is called Zodiac, and you can see there are figures overlaid on one another, and there's a lot of transparency in this. The figures are on their sides, they're floating. There's no real gravity in this diptych. But if you look through these larger figures, and I've got a warrior and a putti in this one, there's an entirely new series of little drawings that form a circle here, and there are 12 of them. It's my rendition of the Zodiac, and so it might not necessarily be the classical one that we're used to, but it has all these archetypal figures in it, like dancers, like a centaur, like a monkey, like a griffin, and a small child. And I do use that image of small children or putti or babies in a number of these. And I think it kind of represents a state of grace in a way. And combined with other figures, it tells a more complete version of what human history can be. The palette on this, as in many of them, is very subdued. And this is something different for me. I really limited myself to just really 3 or 4 colors, and tried to push each of these colors as far as I could to get as much out of them. So there's a warm and a cool, and a white, of course, and that is pretty much it. Ultramarine blue and zinc white, sometimes titanium white, and then also a raw umber. They're painted on boards that are treated with rabbit skin glue gesso, which is a very, very porous plaster-like surface that really absorbs the paint. So there are areas in here that, for instance, right in here on the body of this putti, there's no paint at all aside from that initial layer. So you can see how that really just shines through and is really almost brilliant and compared to some of the other areas in the painting. This diptych is entitled Edification of Young Centaurs, and it's full of classical references from the centaurs to the column, to the bull, and to kind of this Greek decorative piece right here that you see repeated in threes in this particular painting. It also references the golden section. It's very subtle, but it's here. It's kind of makes this arch, which is so prevalent in nature and design and kind of in classical references, is those proportions are a clue to kind of give us the inner dynamic of what's going on in the painting, and a definition of beauty as classically defined. The column is something that I have used in my work many, many times, and only this time I wanted it to be really more transparent than usual, rather than this heavy object. I wanted it to be just diffuse with light, almost radiating light. And you can see the musical notes over here in the birds, so it's almost as if it's singing. And these young centaurs are looking at it and learning. I mean, there's a real sagacity there, I think. That's why I titled it Edification. And they're young centaurs, they're not grown up, so fairly well behaved. And then the owl appears in each side of the paintings as kind of witness and also implying intelligence. And you know, how we use learning and intelligence is really important to how humankind develops. So it's a little social commentary on there on my part, but I basically just wanted to make a really rich painting on this. Again, you can see the transparency with the overlay of images on top of one another. And I'll talk a little bit about that because it was in the other diptych as well, where there's this overlay of imagery. And part of that happened by chance. I work from transparencies and I work from vellum. And I just happened to have in the studio, a couple of sheets were on top of one another, and it made a really interesting drawing. And I thought, I'm going to really go with that and see where I can take it. And it also enabled me to bring the calligraphic line back into my paintings. And I have studied as a calligrapher in the past, and it was just very satisfying to be able to use that line in a painting and have the calligraphic quality really come through. This painting is entitled Becoming Mortal, and you'll notice that there's a putti in this one as well, as in the first piece, Zodiac, only she's holding her wings because she doesn't really need them. She's decided to become mortal. So, you see that image repeated, floating kind of out over the sea with the moon in the background, and trees and a nest up here and the ship. And all these little drawings indicate that she's on a journey, I think. Sometimes I don't know what these paintings mean until 5 or 10 years afterwards, but that's what I was thinking at the time. I just really wanted her to actually be giving up her immortality, become human, and to kind of embrace humankind, and embrace all of humankind. So here we have just a very romantic ship from like the 19th century, and here we have like a tanker. So, again, there's that theme of how we use knowledge for all sorts of things. Sometimes it doesn't turn out real well what we use our knowledge for, but other times it does. So it's kind of amoral in a sense, and that it just is. But there's always hope that it will blossom into what we need. And so that's why I have her holding, these three holding those blossoms in their hands. And that's a crow's nest up there that I kind of wanted to relate to the crow's nest in these old ships, but also just the idea of nature's always with us and always there. This painting is entitled Lightning, Thunder, Rain, and actually it's the first one I started in the series, and I was really wanting to explore transparency, not so much of figures, but actually just getting light, have these paintings be light infused. So the clouds appealed to me because I could make them sort of abstract and just use the shape, but then I wanted some realistic shapes in here, so I wanted the reference to nature. I also thought it would make these read as clouds more, so kind of operate on two levels, more of a realistic level and also a more abstract level. I mean, obviously these don't look like real clouds, but they're rather symbolic of clouds. But they do hearken to what the nature of clouds are. I mean, clouds do produce lightning, rain, and thunder. And so I tried to convey that by how I represented them. This was really kind of fun because the piano key was like playing the cloud and creating the noise, the thunder. There's a screen here that I felt was really kind of necessary to sort of separate, but still allowed to show through those natural elements from the real world. So the trees can show through, this kind of architectural shape can show through that screen, but yet it still kind of made this separation, but allowed you to look through. And this piece really influenced the one we were looking at before, where it also had a panel on the side, a screen. that was fascinating to me because beforehand it didn't have that screen, but again, I kind of felt it just gave another level of depth of looking through, or almost looking around on that side. And that was important to me. You know, I also was going for, you know, I have talked about the limited palette a bit, but I really tried to keep, in all of these, the work is fairly tonal. And I really wanted to kind of have a warm ground. And, you know, you can see this is the ground with very, very little color on it. And then going over it with a cool, really thin down layer of paint that just kind of makes it shimmer. And so that was a technique that you know, I've used in a number of these paintings, and rather than having things be so opaque, it was just allowing those layers to build up, and you do get that transparency and that shimmer and that light in the paintings. This painting is entitled Blue Ether, and I mean, yeah, obviously it's in the same ilk as the Zodiac piece. But in this one, I really wanted to restrict myself even further to just that blue, and I wanted it to be a really intense blue. So on the side putti right here, this is just pure ultramarine laid over that rabbit skin gesso. And it just is, it's electric. I mean, that blue is just so, so blue. And then the rest of the figures are muted somewhat with, you know, white over them, and it kind of makes them ghost-like in a way. And I wanted that. I wanted that really, really to be transparent in a way that this isn't transparent too, but in an entirely different way. And again, you have the calligraphic line running through here. And you know, you can't really tell, but this is actually a silhouette of a warrior running along in here. The centaur's pretty obvious. You know, and again, that was in the Zodiac piece. And also, I wanted to look, these decorative elements here are very calligraphic. They're from, I don't know, an old manuscript. They were traditionally used as decoration. And I wanted them to look as if they were charcoal, but they're not. I mean, those are actually paint. And people have asked me whether they're charcoal or just drawn in pencil, and it's not. It's actually gone over with paint. So, you know, again, it's pretty light, and it references a kind of a calligraphic spirit. This one more so than any of the others, I think. Not just by the line, but also by the decorative motifs in the margins. And these putti that I'm referencing here, and there are a number of them, they're based on a figure that I saw in a manuscript. It was a choir book actually in Siena, and there's this figure, doesn't look much like this actually, but there's this figure that has blue hair, and that blue hair just is undulating, and it's just amazing. It just sort of grabs that whole piece, which is a large page, probably easily 17 by 20. But that tiny little figure sort of just holds your attention and pulls you in. And so I wanted to kind of reference that and just make it bigger. This piece is entitled Sextant and Apple. I had never seen a sextant before, and I went to a museum in Copenhagen that had all these instruments from, you know, shipfaring over centuries. And I've always been reluctant to use instruments that I haven't actually seen. I know what their purpose is, but it was fascinating seeing them. So I finally had the confidence to use the sextant, which is a tool for navigation. And this woman here is holding an apple, which to me, she's sort of an Eve. They're both like Adam and Eve, and she's holding an apple, which represents wisdom. And he's got the tool here, which is a tool for navigation. And there's, you know, an airplane up in this right corner, which is also another navigational tool, or transport, as we have transport down here. And I think what I was trying to get across in this painting again was that idea you know, knowledge is simply is, it exists, and how we use it is really, really important. And for instance, there's, you know, a 19th century, well, it's older than that, probably 18th century ship here. And this is a tanker, which, you know, as we all know, probably is a huge polluting machine, but we all love to go to IKEA and we use all those objects that those tankers are bringing to us. So, I mean, there's that idea of wisdom and how we use it and how can we continue to improve. And it's, you know, I think she's rather hopeful that, you know, we can actually do good things with it if we just have the will and put our minds to it. These figures are, and the owl kind of agrees, he's kind of representing, I think, wisdom. And these two figures here are actually kind of referenced from Pablo Neruda's home. They're not exact, but he collected these figureheads from these ships. And so I kind of did this amalgam of them and invented my own. But I did want them to look like they were wooden. They were really substantial and they looked like they'd been out in the weather and they'd weathered a lot. So that's kind of what they're doing here. And the space is, you know, goes from dark to day to really bright down here. And so you get all the light moving into the dark, and it's all kind of neutral as to whether it's, there's no kind of moral judgment on that score, it just kind of is. This one is painted somewhat differently than the others. It's painted more opaquely so that you don't have the transparency in the same way that you do in the others. I mean, this is, if you get up close, you can kind of look through layers of paint and see colors underneath coming through. In that sense, there is the transparency. In the shadow of this, you know, fish-like or porpoise-like figure here, you can kind of see what's going on there as well. But that idea of layers, that there's a whole other universe going on that's above us. You know, what's happening below is also happening above, and we're totally unaware of it. Let's see, anything else on this one? This piece is entitled Hope, and it's, well, a lot of my works are literary influenced. I mean, I still am reading Pablo Neruda a lot, and so that kind of percolates up through a lot of the ideas presented in these paintings. He's very romantic, and I think that kind of shows in the work that I do. But this poem actually references Emily Dickinson, and I've never quite been drawn to her before. I mean, she's a magnificent poet, of course, but there's a poem she wrote entitled Hope is a Thing with Feathers. And I kind of thought this idea of hope infused all of these paintings, and I was just really drawn to that idea of hope and birds, the thing with feathers. So that's kind of the inspiration behind this whole painting, and I wanted to really, really grapple with that idea of transparency, but in a very traditional sense, in that I would build this up slowly, layer after layer after layer, and allow that depth to come through, almost like a stained glass, where you'd be looking through these different layers of paint and to see what was underneath, and then it would kind of glow back at you. So I feel this one really does that, and the bird is kind of subtle in this, but because it's just has such a yellow bird, it kind of tends to come through. You know, again, this was limited to just, you know, pretty much 3 colors again, you know, warm and cold, and the white was added at the very end to really highlight and bring things out. I had to be very patient with myself. You know, I had 2 or 3 other paintings going on at the same time, because each layer had to dry before I could put another layer on. And the layers were just pure color, they weren't mixed. There was no mixture of white to lighten them, or no mixture of blue to darken them. The blue was just laid down. I mean, you can see in the shadow areas, there's some blue here that was pretty much, you know, the cool that kind of established those darks. And I would just keep going over and over and over. So I really had to think ahead in that sense and kind of plan what was going to get darker. And because it got darker with each subsequent layer. And then at the end, kind of adding the white to kind of really highlight something and make it pop. So this is a very traditional way of being transparent, much different than the others, but I did enjoy working that way. It was quite different for me. You know, often when I'm painting, and actually when I'm preparing the larger panels, I'll make some smaller I'll coat some paper with the rabbit skin gesso, just so I can kind of work out ideas on these. And, you know, you'll recognize these images from the paintings that we've been looking at. They're kind of like little cameos of subjects in the paintings. I mean, here we have the bird. This one's entitled Dusk with the Trees. And I was really wanting to have this bird just sort of pop and be really yellow. And it was kind of a preparatory piece for the painting that we just finished looking at. This one is painted somewhat differently. It's more opaque, but the birds are very transparent, as are the trees. And the form is based on, it's a bush tit, so it's a round little bird, almost like a ball. But I just really just enjoy watching them so much. They don't stand still, they flit around a lot. They're out my feeder a lot this time of year too, in May. The owl is, you know, you'll recognize the owl from the painting of the sextant and the apple. And this was kind of, I did this one after I painted that one, just because I just liked that owl so much. It was just interesting. Their face and their feathers are so interesting. It's such a, you know, the wings are so heavy. I mean, they're feathers, but they really seem to have mass and form, sculptural almost. And then this little tiny pootie was I was just having fun with some of the figures that were in the others. And I really wanted to show this was more of a wing. And I think that it's painted differently. The little pootie itself is still pretty transparent, not much paint, but the area around her is pretty well painted in an opaque way. And I was experimenting in this one in that there are these textural elements in it. So the surface isn't totally smooth. And actually, in these three right here, in addition to this one, these also have textural elements. And this one I really stirred the gesso up in order for it to form air bubbles, so I would have those pockets. And you can kind of see that if you move in close and start looking at this. This figure has that, is painted smoothly, but around her you really get that textural surface. And this one also as well. And the swan and this bluebird kind of looking back. And this one's entitled Bird Watching, because I thought this bird's watching that one and that one's watching this one, so it's kind of a little play on words there. And this is a classical reference. She shows up in Zodiac as well. And I just wanted to give her her own small kind of little signature piece. This series of drawings occurred after I finished the paintings. And, you know, this one's entitled Crow's Nest, this one is Feathers, and this one is So Many Clouds. Actually, this one happened before the paintings. It was an older drawing that I reworked with the birds and the clouds. I had the tree. I had the tree for this one, but I didn't have the bird, so I added the bird on that. And I felt that they made a nice triptych. There's something about the number 3 that kind of hints at divinity or how we look at the universe. And I, again, was referencing nature, again, with the bird and the trees and kind of the hopefulness of it. And then this pudding figure is kind of floating above everything and just looking out towards that bird. And, hopefully generating those feelings of hopefulness. And I should speak about floating a bit, because I didn't realize till I was the third painting into this that just about every piece of this work is floating. It's not really grounded in gravity. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Why do I have them floating? Well, the drawings, it's not so much floating as the paintings. They do seem more eager to me. And I think that was kind of a response, in one sense, to the paintings. It's wanting something to be actually referenced and held down. And I think in these two drawings on the end, that these were, from my sketchbook, that they, were drawn looking at nature, looking at a tree, and then kind of developed into something else. This one is the tree in my backyard with the crow's nest that's not there anymore. The crows use the materials from their nests to build subsequent nests in different trees, and I think that's very intelligent. They kind of allow the winter storms to sort of sanitize them and make them all pristine, and they rebuild those nests in a different tree. And so I've gained a new appreciation for the intelligence of crows. They're quite intelligent, and so I use them a lot in my work.